how do you explain things like malaria and children dying of that?
Well, most of these diseases, again, are naturally occurring diseases which our body should be able to fight against as long as our body is in complete harmony with love. As long as we don't have emotions within us that have been usually imposed upon us by our environment that are out of harmony with love, our body will be able to fight any of these diseases and actually not even experience them in all cases. So whenever anybody experiences disease of any kind, it's because of the lack of love that's either that exists within the soul of the individual, that is usually caused by, and in case of children is always caused by, the lack of love in the parents and in society generally. So almost everything, well, everything that actually occurs, so this is the motel, everything that actually occurs, I'll just pull over here, inside of the body of any individual, anything that occurs inside the body of any individual occurs because of the environmental conditions that have created soul-based feelings inside of the individual that are out of harmony with love. Now, in the case of a child, usually those feelings are being caused by their parents or their immediate environment. So often, and this is what happens with multi-generational problems, is that the parents have certain emotional belief systems and belief systems that are out of harmony with love. These belief systems and emotions which are in their soul, as soon as the child is conceived, the child starts receiving these beliefs and emotions. And so the child, by the time the child is born, has already got a susceptibility to disease and a susceptibility to colds and a susceptibility to other to things like that, and their body has to develop immunities. I suggest to people that if they were in complete harmony with love at the time of conception of their child, the child would actually be born with immunity to everything and would not have any potential of being able to be harmed by any disease, whether the disease is caused by an external influence or an internal one. So whether the disease is caused by some kind of insect or some kind of bug or some kind of virus or some kind of bacteria or any kind of external influence, none of those things would have an effect on the child, because the child, in the condition of love, the love inside of the child affects both the physical and spiritual bodies in such a way that the energy systems of both bodies work perfectly, and so therefore there is no way that any bug that enters the body can actually generate and grow. There's no way for it to grow. All of them grow as a result of us being out of harmony with love, not in harmony with love.
Just explain, like in areas like the third world, it's not when you say out of harmony with love, it's not necessarily even an attacking feeling or a nasty feeling inside of the parents. It's that they lack self-love themselves and they've been taught by oppressive.
So let's clarify it. In harmony with love requires that we be in harmony with love of ourselves. One of the main reasons why we catch many viruses and other illnesses is because we don't love ourselves. We've learned to not love ourselves. We've been taught, in fact, often from a very, very young age, to not love ourselves. Often our parents don't love themselves. And how can a parent who doesn't love themselves truly teach a child how to love itself? They can't. And so the child learns to not love itself. So many of the diseases that occur on this planet are the result of a lack of self-love, actually. They're the result of a lack of care of ourselves. And this is why you'll notice that when we don't care for ourselves, we become highly susceptible to viruses. You know, most people catch a flu when they're already run down, when they're already, feeling stressed out and they're already feeling run down. Well, that's because they're already not loving themselves. If they loved themselves, they wouldn't ever allow themselves to get into a run-down condition. If they really loved themselves, they would not ever allow themselves to be placed in constant condition of stress, which causes the degradation of their own body systems in such a way that eventually makes them susceptible to disease. The reality is that if we care for ourselves and learn how to care for ourselves properly, the majority of us would experience hardly any diseases at all. Most of our illnesses, if you think about viral illnesses, colds and flus and those kind of things, most of those kind of illnesses are all caused, usually, we're run down before we get them. So we're already not loving ourselves before we get them. And the getting of them is an indication that we're run down and we need to love ourselves more. Yeah. So the majority, when I talk about a lack of love on the planet, the majority of people think about the love of others coming towards themselves. But that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the lack of love that a person has for themselves. That's the biggest problem on the planet. And the majority of people have very little love or care for themselves. And as a result, they become very, very open and susceptible to many forms of diseases and illnesses. Of course, not all disease and illness are caused by a lack of love of yourself, because there are diseases and illnesses like cancer, for example, that are caused by a lack of love of others. And they are caused by the way in which you interact with others, the demands that you have upon others, the internal rage that you project upon others, the passive aggressiveness that you project upon others, and so forth. And these kind of things are all out of harmony with love, and they all have an effect on our body.
So how you behave to somebody else.
Yes. And it's not so much it's not just how you behave, because that's about action, but how you feel about them. It's more about how you feel about them than how you behave. Of course, how you behave is usually the result of how you feel. But how you feel about others and how you feel about yourselves is the key part of love. So if you feel love for another person, you would never want to be angry with them. You'd never be condescending with them even. You would always be open. You would always allow them to have their own use of their will. And the only time you'd want to restrict their will is if you could see that their will was affecting lots of people in a negative direction.